Good morning, everyone. What we'll get started with initially here is kind of a review of the Agent Manager application and the real-time reports in there. So the Agent Manager, in case you're not familiar with it, is a component of the Supervisor tools. They exist on the ECC server itself, but can also be installed on any supervisor or administrator's PC to give you some visibility into your contact center. So just to show that off to you here first, I've already got it opened. And this can be found once it's installed in your Start button in a group called ShoreTel. I still have it listed as ShoreTel here. But what you're seeing here, when you initially open the Agent Manager, it will start out blank. And you can think of this as kind of a canvas we can start to paint on to look at different pieces of information that I might be interested in. The design of this is sort of widget-based. Just to show you an example here, I'm going to open one I already have created. And you'll see that it's a window kind of inside of the Agent Manager window here. Just to open a few more for you. And each one of these is what Mitel refers to as a real-time report. And the real-time reports are accessed through the Agent Manager. There's a separate application we use for historical reporting if we want to look at trends over time. But if I'm interested in looking at the real-time status of the system, we do that here through Agent Manager. Now, there are several types of reports we can get access to here. And what I'm going to do is click the New button here in the upper left. And this is just going to show me all of the templates I can use to create these reports. Some of these are more useful than others. Some of them really don't have much use in any system. But these are the real-time reports. We also have two other kinds of reports we can look at here from the dropdown. We can look at hourly summary reports and also daily summary reports. I'll show you a few examples of those in a second, but at the moment, I'm going to start by creating a new real-time report here just to show you how we can do that. I'm going to recreate this agents report I have here in the upper left. This is what we call the brief agents report. Basically, any of these reports that are described as brief will give you sort of this spreadsheet layout. So you can see a lot of information on one widget. The detailed reports, you'll see some listed here as detailed. Those are going to give you less of a spreadsheet view and more of a custom view to display a lot of information about it. But we'll look at one of those here in a minute. So for a brief agent report, when I create a new one of those, it's going to start out blank and it's going to ask me what agents I want to report on. I can go ahead and just select everyone here or select a subset. I'm just going to hold Shift and select all, highlight all of them, and hit OK. And now on my new brief agents report here, I've got detailed information about the status of all of my current agents. I can see all the agents who are configured in the system. I'll see whether they're logged in or out. And then also I've got information in the state column here about their current status. One question that comes up frequently is what do these different states mean? So I do have another slide here, which I will show you guys. So feel free to take a screenshot of this, and we'll definitely include it in the recording. But this is a screen cap of a page that I haven't been able to find in any of the recent documentation that describes the different states we have for the agents, the things you can see in the state column. Some of the more common ones we'll see is obviously idle. That means they're logged in and waiting for a call, but there's no call currently in the queue. If they're on a call, their state will be ACD. You can also see some different ones here that cause some confusion. The biggest one is actually this O reserved or outbound reserved. If you do have your system set up for scheduled callbacks or automated callbacks using the dial list feature to perform an outbound campaign, an agent will be placed into that outbound reserve state while they're waiting for the system to make that outbound call. So if you do see that, that's what that means. INC for an incoming call that's not through the call center, so just an extension call or a personal call, and then also out for an outbound call. Out doesn't mean they're logged out, it means they're on an outbound call. All right, and then some additional information: name, agent number, agent extension, the state time, how long they've been in this particular state. Good way to identify long-running calls or maybe an agent who's been idle for too long if there's a problem there. If they were released, we can see their release code. And then a couple of columns here that can also tend to be a little bit confusing. So I've got two columns here that show me the number of calls, ACD calls that they've handled, and NACD or non-ACD calls that they've handled. The important thing to realize when you're looking at these call numbers on a real-time report is that these are over the current interval. Now, the interval is an amount of time that can be specified in the contact center director for reporting purposes. By default, it is 30 minutes. So these numbers are going to represent the number of calls handled in that 30-minute time. If your interval time is different, perhaps it's been adjusted to maybe be 60 minutes, these are going to show you those numbers over the past 60 minutes. But generally, any number you see on a real-time report is going to be looking at the current interval, unless we happen to be looking at the hourly summary or daily summary reports. So for a daily summary report, I'm going to pull that up as a daily brief group report. And we'll look at two groups here, inbound 1 and inbound 2. And so now here on my new daily brief group report, I've got the numbers so far for the day. You'll notice that has differed here from my report just above it. This one is just the real-time brief group report. So you can see these numbers are much lower. Inbound ACD calls in the past 30 minutes has only been 2. But for the day, so far, it's been 18. So just something to keep in mind, the differences between these real-time, hourly, and daily reports. Now, when we're setting up these reports on the display, we can save this configuration. So this is what I will see every time I open the application. To do that, I have to save individually this report that I just now set up. I can tell that I haven't saved this because I see that asterisk in the title bar here, and it says untitled. What I can do is just go up here, hit the Save As button. In this case, I have to give it a name. I'll call it my new agent report. Now, when you're saving a report, we do have two options here. I can save it as a private report, which means only I can see it in the future if I go to open any existing reports, or I can save it as a public report, in which case I'll be able to see it, but also any other supervisor on the system is also able to make use of this report. So if you do have a set of common reports, for instance, this brief agent report is a good one, that you do want to provide to multiple supervisors, you can just simply save it as a public report, and then they'll actually be able to go to the open option here in Agent Manager, and they'll see it listed under the public reports, and they'll be able to add that to their own screen. Once I've saved all the reports, I can go here to File, Workspace, and click Save as Default. And now in the future, anytime I go and open the Agent Manager again on my PC, it's going to provide my group of reports here to me. One other interesting report that can be useful is the hourly summary report. And this is one I've already created, again, for some of our own groups. Let me just move these out of the way so we can see that a little bit better here. And the hourly summary report is going to give you, in 15-minute chunks, information about the calls that have been going on in that previous 15 minutes. So here we see the interval starting at 8 to 8:15. So that's the first row here. We had one call. Average talk time, 7 minutes, 4 seconds. Between 8:15 and 8:30, the next row, another call. No talk time associated with that one. Between 8:30 and 8:45, 4 calls. So this is a really good way to identify your busy times of day. Definitely something from a staffing perspective to keep an eye on for your call center is what are your busy times of day. And these hourly interval reports, we call them, will help you identify that. And again, once I've created the new report, I can save it. And then again, go back to my workspace, save as default. And now here's my new default layout. One other utility that's provided by the agent manager is up here in the top toolbar. It is this little key icon right next to the big red log out here. This is the login manager. The login manager can be used to log agents in and out of additional groups in the system. So in our case, Verteks, we have 2 main groups we use for inbound calls, inbound 1 and inbound 2. And as a supervisor, I have the ability to take any logged in agent and put them into any particular group. One warning about using the login manager here is I can only work with agents who are logged in. So I see I have 4 logged in agents here. If I do log an agent out, I can't log them back in from the login manager. They would have to do that themselves by logging back into the web page, the Agent Interaction Center web page. They'll actually disappear from here if they're not here. In fact, I'm going to log Steve out just so you can see what happens. So once I completely remove Steve from all his groups here, it's really going to warn me that, hey, I'm about to log him out and I'm not going to be able to log him back in. Yeah, once I apply these changes.
Yeah, that's a great, while you're doing that, Mike, just wanted to bring this up. Somebody emailed me a question. Just remember you can use the chat in the questions as well, but somebody shot me an email and said, can't you do a lot of this in Bright Metrics? The answer to that question is yes, you can. I also want to remind you that if you do have, I know several of you do, if you do have Bright Metrics, it does have the ability to log you in, even if you're completely logged out. You can't do it from here, but you can do it if you got the Bright Metrics Contact Center plugin. So just FYI on that.
Yep, definitely. Thanks for that, Don. Yeah, and just to show you where that function is in Bright Metrics here, in case you're wondering, you do have to have the Bright Metrics real-time edition here. And with the supervisor features enabled on a real-time dashboard, you'll see this little supervisor icon in the upper right corner of the real-time widgets. We can click that and basically have access to that same login, logout functionality inside of Bright Metrics with the additional improvement that you can log an agent in Bright Metrics. To do that, you just have to provide their extension, what phone extension they're sitting at when you do that here in the extension field. But with an extension provided there, so Steve is logged out, I can enter his extension and log him in here.
Thanks, Mike.
All right. one other feature to note about the Agent Manager, there are some additional columns you can look at in these brief reports. If you do want to take a look at all the available columns to customize these brief reports, you can click on the report up top, and then up in the toolbar, you'll see this little yellow notepad with the green undered arrow. This will allow you to add or remove columns from these brief reports. So there are some additional columns here if I'm maybe interested in keeping track of outbound ACD calls, or maybe what current groups they're in, or if you're using the chat or email features, we can add that information here as additional columns. And of course, these columns can be clicked and dragged to reposition them on the screen. Again, just remember to save any changes you make to these reports once you customize them. All right. So I think that is
once you
about
get
it.
that layout saved, yeah, last thing I wanted to point out, and this is something I get questions on a lot, and this is just a tip from me personally, not endorsed by anybody but me, but what I like to do is, just because graphically this can be tough to get looking the way you want, I like to get this lined up exactly the way I want graphically, and then you can save that layout. It will remember the positioning of all of these. That's called a workspace save as default. It'll remember the positioning of all these report widgets. And when you log back in, it'll bring them back just like this. And then the last thing, and this is a little tweakier, but what I've done when I have people ask me, hey, I want my managers or my supervisors to all have a similar look and feel, I'll just use the Windows snipping tool, or Snagit if you're familiar with that, and grab a screenshot of this, literally print it out or save it and email it to them, and walk around and reconfigure them and save them as default. So that's a tip that we use sometimes we're trying to make them all match.
Yep, definitely. Thanks, Don. All right, so what we'll do now is pause briefly and let's start taking a look at...
Quick question, Mike. One of the questions that came in that just now was, can the live reports show abandoned calls in the Agent Manager? Aaron, and the answer to that is yes. There actually is an abandoned that you can get right there. We are seeing, I think maybe what you're asking is the specific abandoned calls and not just the numbers, because it is showing us abandoned count here. But I think your question is probably the specific calls that were abandoned by number. And if that's the answer, then we do have a report for that we can run. We can pull it up in Bright Metrics, and you can see the count here in Agent Manager.
Yes, so the abandoned call count is associated with the group. So those will show up on the group reports here. In fact, just to also show you, I'm going to close this one and just open a detailed group report just to show you what that looks like. So we do have a column for the abandoned calls on the brief group report. In the detailed report, we do also have that information. So you can see there's a ACD abandoned here. What's nice about the detailed report, we also have some average times that get included here. So average time to abandon, max time to abandon. So a little bit more information you can see on the detailed report. But here in the next segment, I'll actually show you how to look at those in the historical reports, and that we can actually get a detailed list of abandoned calls out of that.
Thank you.
Skipping ahead. All right, so here in our next segment, we'll talk about the historical reporting application. That is simply called Contact Center Reports. Again, here, once the supervisor tools are installed, ShoreWare Contact Center Reports. And again, when we open that, it'll look very similar to the Agent Manager. We kind of start off blank here. A lot fewer buttons up top. I just have a new and an open. I always recommend starting with one of the existing templates here, which you can get access to from open. You'll see a large number of reports in your system that start with the RA 1.1, 1.2. These are pre-configured templates that basically have relevant information pre-selected for you. As an example, I'll pick one of our most popular ones here, the Group Performance Report by Date. And you'll see when I open this template, here we already have a number of columns selected for me. What I need to do to look at this information is simply provide some additional information to fill out the dates, times, and group that I want to see this for, which I can do by going to the toolbar here on the left and clicking this Report Parameters button. It's the notepad with an arrow circling around it. That will open up my parameters window. And here I can select the groups I'm interested in. So I'll look at our inbound one group. The date range I'm interested in. Now, on the date window, we've got some options here that can be a little confusing. I can deal with specific dates, and this is generally what I'm going to select if I'm investigating. I'm just interested in running this report once. So maybe I'm just interested in seeing how we did the past week. This isn't going to be a scheduled report. I'm running it manually. So I'm going to select these specific dates. If I was interested in setting this report up as a scheduled report, something that's going to be emailed to me weekly, I'm going to use these relative dates instead. So if I was interested in, for instance, the past week, so maybe I'm going to run this report on Sunday, I want to see the past 7 days. My from is going to be now minus 7 days, and my to is going to be 0 days. This is going to give me a relative date. Every time this report runs, it's always going to look at the past 7 days. So if I were scheduling this report to run on a Sunday, it's always going to give me the previous full week's worth of data. Just something to keep in mind with the relative dates. In this case, I'm going to go with my specifics. And selecting the time. Again, I can choose business hours. In this case, I'm just going to leave both of these specific times set to 12 a.m. That's actually going to give me the full 24-hour period. And hit OK. And so now that I've filled in the parameters for this report, I will choose the button just under the report parameters here on the left toolbar, the Generate a Report from a Template. And this is actually going to fill in this report with the data that I've asked for here. Now, again, this is the built-in template. So this is data that Mitel's already basically selected for me that's relevant for a group performance report. So I can see the number of calls accepted, which the accepted calls are actually, a call is counted as accepted as soon as it hits this group. It doesn't have to be answered by anyone. Before it even starts to ring on anyone's phone, it is considered accepted if it hits the system. Now, the accepted calls are going to be a total of the number of calls that are answered, abandoned, interflowed out. That's a programming thing we can do if I want to send it to another group or another system altogether. And also, there's a column that doesn't appear here that is ACD calls answered by another group. That's if we're using the overflow feature to add additional groups to a call to be answered. Those calls are going to show up in another data column called ACD calls answered by another group. And the total of those answered by another group, interflowed, abandoned, and answered is going to equal the ACD calls accepted. Some other numbers here that can be a little bit confusing, especially when we look at these averages here. So average number of calls in queue concurrently. You know, this can be kind of weird to look at. So 0.01, how can I have 0.01 of a call? Well, we're just looking at that 24-hour time period, and we're dividing by the number of calls we've had all day, and looking at how many calls are in there more than once. And this is where setting these times differently can give us some very different numbers. And we're looking at some of these averages because it's using the time we selected here to calculate those. So if you are getting some kind of weird numbers here for some of these calculated fields and you're not sure what might be going on, it could be because some of these times are not quite right for your environment. We can see the average wait time in queue, longest wait time in queue. TSF, Target Service Factor, is another acronym that can be a little confusing. The Target Service Factor here is expressed as a percentage. So this number is a percentage. And it's the number of calls that are getting answered within our TASA, or Target Average Speed of Answer. That's something that we set up in Director, and then it influences some of these fields on the reports. So we can define a target average speed of answer. For instance, the default is 1 minute, 60 seconds. And then this TSF is the percentage of calls that are answered within that 60-second period. You can hover over any of these columns to get a pretty good description of these fields. So if you do have any questions about what these mean, you can just hover to discover what these are and look at this data. From here, I do also have some other options. I can obviously print this out, but also here I have an option to export the content. And it can actually provide us some different formats to put this in. My personal favorite is actually the Excel format here. And you can actually export this to a Excel spreadsheet where you can manipulate this data some more if you need to, or preserve it for additional use in the future. Now, there are some reports that appear here in the open section that do not appear or cannot be recreated from scratch by going here to the new. And specifically, those are the agent activity log report and the abandoned calls log. These two reports can only be accessed here from their templated version. They're essentially special. The agent activity log is going to give me the activity for a particular agent over a given time frame. So this is going to show me logins, logouts, releases, different release codes. Basically, if you're going to see when an agent's getting in and out of the system, the agent activity log report is what you want to go to there. And then as related to Aaron's question earlier, for abandoned calls, we can go to the abandoned calls log report. And this is actually going to give me a list of all the calls that were abandoned. Some places like to look at this information. Potentially these might be people you want to give a call back to. And I'm just going to make sure I get some here. Select again the previous week. And some specific times. We'll hit OK, and then we'll choose the generate option. And so here is actually a list of all the individual abandoned calls we had last week between the 11th and 15th. Not a whole lot of information here. Really, the only thing we can collect is the date and time of the call and the caller ID. But potentially, you may want to try to give these people a call back, or just have this information potentially to match to some other things in your own systems.
One little tweaky tip here that I like to recommend if people are really focused on driving results for these abandoned call logs is to set up the abandoned call log report to dump to a PDF or Excel in a shared network location that multiple supervisors have access to. And then inside the Connect Client toolbar, create a button that's a link to the abandoned calls report. and have the ECC report run, multiple times per day. So basically, right from your desktop in your custom toolbar, click a button and it'll go to the latest and greatest updated abandoned call report, and it'll just be refreshed for you multiple times per day, not another email to deal with. It's just right there on that shared location. That's kind of a nice, tricky way to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Don. And just to also briefly show you, perfect segue to my next step, how to schedule a report here from the Contact Center reports. So for instance, if I wanted to schedule this abandoned calls log to run multiple times a day, be kind of continuously updated. Here, I'm going to use my relative dates and actually set this to now -0, now -0, because I'm going to run this for just today. And I'll set this again to be that 24-hour period, because I'm going to have it kind of accumulate these abandoned calls throughout the day. And once I've selected the parameters again for the report, I can go to the last option here to define an automatic report. That will open another window here where I can schedule it. So in this case, I'm just going to give this schedule a notes, name, and calls. I always recommend checking this synchronize box. I have to make sure I save this first. And then we can actually choose to run this every 15 minutes. That's as quickly as we can do it, is 15 minutes. We can run half hour, 45 minutes, or if this is just set to zeros here, this will be once every hour. And then if we want to just run it specific times a day, we can choose the specific option here. But in this case, I'll set this up so it runs every hour. And then the destination, we can choose printer or file. You do want to choose file for the email option. It's basically what it'll do is save this as a file. The path that it can generate these automatic reports in is always only going to be on the contact center server itself. So we would have to set up a folder and a share here if we wanted to push this out to provide a link to supervisors. But in this case, I'll just choose a folder here. We'll choose a name. And I'll leave it in the CSV format here. We can append the date and time that this report runs. So it can actually keep previous generations, if you like, saved in this folder. And then if I wanted to also email this report, I can check the email report option here. Enter the email address. You can set up either groups in Exchange or Outlook for this, or I can specify multiple names here just by using a semicolon between the addresses. And then it'll automatically generate a subject line for me with just the date and time and abandoned calls report. And I hit OK here. And now this report is scheduled to run. I can see all the reports that I have scheduled to run by going here to File and Schedule List. And this is actually going to show me all the reports that I have scheduled to run automatically in the system. This won't show me every supervisor's schedule report, only mine, but in Director we can see a list of all the other schedule reports set up on the system. One other thing I like to note, obviously, about the reports, there is a lot of data here we can report on, especially if you take a look at creating a new report from scratch here. You'll notice the blank templates have no columns. If I want to add a column, I can right-click in the blank area here and choose Add Column. And there are hundreds of data points that we can add to these reports, these historical reports, it can be very confusing, especially if you're trying to set up a report for something really specific. Please, if you do have any questions or concerns or trouble getting a report looking the way you want to see it, feel free to reach out to us. We'd be happy to help you set up reports that will be useful for you and show you the kind of information you're wanting to get out of the system.
Perfect, Mike. Thank you. Yeah, we spent quite a bit of time working on the embedded Mitel Contact Center reports here. I know a lot of you are running other tools like Brightmetrics. We wanted to focus this on what was kind of included for free as long as you have a supervisor license. So those are some of the top issues we faced with Mitel Contact Center reports in the built-in tool. We've had totally other trainings on Brightmetrics. They're on our YouTube channel, they're on the Brightmetrics channel. We'll do a follow-up one just on Brightmetrics as well next month, a Brightmetrics training. But we wanted to show you the reports so that we could go over that in detail. And hopefully you got quite a bit out of that. I know it's an in-depth topic. I encourage you to get in there, experiment. It's really hard to break anything on those reports. And definitely feel free to submit either support tickets or requests for callbacks on any of the issues you face with reporting, and me or Mike or Steve or one of our contact center experts will get with you and help you get what you need. So thanks for covering that, Mike.
Yep, thanks, Todd. All right, so our next segment here, we're just going to cover a little bit about Contact Center Director and some of the information we can see there. And I apologize if it seems like I'm going to be rushing through a bit of this, because there's a lot of content here as far as setting up new groups and services and agents in the system. But in Contact Center Director, just give you a brief overview of the structure, the basic structure of a queue. Everything starts kind of with this fourth option here, the IRN. And idle too long. So when we're talking about a call coming into the contact center, what that starts with is the IRN. IRN stands for inbound routing number, and these are basically just the extensions on the phone system that we use to get calls into the contact center. These IRN numbers are route points configured in the PBX. So if I hop into my regular director here on the PBX side, and we go here to features, call control, route points, you can see here, so for our help desk IRN, that's a route point with extension 1234. And in the contact center, I see here I have an IRN set up as 1234, and its destination is our next step up, which is the service. So all calls enter the system through an IRN, and then that IRN is going to route that call to a service. There are some other things we can do with it at the IRN level, but generally speaking, in the simplest configuration, we're just going to have an IRN number that's going to go straight to a default destination, which is going to be a service. The service essentially represents the queue itself. So from within the service, I can choose a couple of things here. So I can choose my agent selection criteria for these calls. I think longest idle is the most popular, but we can change that if we need to. I can set the wrap-up time and forced release timeout for this particular service, this queue. On the announcements tab, we can do a few different things here, but primarily these are going to be announcements that we want to play to a caller when they're entering the queue. And we have three different classes of announcements. We have the mandatory. This is an announcement that's going to play to the caller as soon as they hit the service, but before they speak to an agent. So this might be a good place to include a message about calls being recorded if that's something that's going on in your environment. The first announcement is an announcement that only plays to a caller if their call is going to be queued. The first announcement will not play if there is an agent idle and available and the call can be routed directly to the agent. This is usually where we put a comfort message about, all agents are busy, thank you for continuing to hold. Something to that effect will usually include as a first announcement. And then we can have a list of secondary announcements. These are the things that are going to play occasionally while they're waiting in queue. So these can be marketing messages, informational messages. These all are done through the scripter. So there's some different things we can do there if you wanted to potentially provide them with some menu options to maybe let them request a callback or leave a message in a voicemail box. Those are all things that we can do through the secondary announcements. And these can be configured to play every so many seconds while they're continuing to wait in the queue. And our third tab here, the destination, the service has to have a group as a destination. So the group is just going to be the group of agents who are going to be primarily answering calls for this queue. In this case, it's our inbound one group. Now, some other features you can take advantage of here. Overflow allows me to include agents from an additional group after a certain number of seconds has gone by where a call is queued. So for instance, if I wanted to configure my inbound two group to be added to the agents who are already set up in the inbound one group, after 60 seconds, that's the timeout column here, I could set that up. And what that would do is after 60 seconds of queue time have expired, now the agents who are also in this inbound two group will be added to the group of agents who are eligible to take this call from the queue. Now the interflow option will actually remove this call from this queue entirely and send it to another queue. So in our case, instead of using the overflow option to send it to the inbound two group, we actually have an interflow set up after 30 seconds to send it to the inbound two service, which is bound to the inbound two group. There are different reasons you might want to set it up in different ways and not use overflow versus interflow. Generally, they're going to be pretty situational depending on your exact requirements, but both of these options are available. One question we get a lot is, what does this predictive interflow checkbox do? If you are using interflow to remove calls from a service, what this will actually do is if the average queue time exceeds the timeout configured here, so in this case 30 seconds, the system won't even bother to queue it for 30 seconds in the first group. It's just going to send it straight to the interflow destination before it's even waited here. So again, kind of situational when you might want to use it, but that's what the predictive interflow option does for you. And a few other options here, no agent destination. If there are no agents logged into this group and a call comes into it, what do we want to do with it? Again, we can send it to somewhere else inside the system, to another IRN, or we can actually choose device here as an option and just choose any extension on the PBX. So maybe we want to set up a voicemail box or something like that. We can configure that here as a device destination. The scheduled callbacks tab has information about scheduled callbacks, some of the limits we can put on that if we're using that feature in this queue, and then the automatic abandon callbacks if we're using that feature. And again, the destination for any service is going to be a group, and the group is just a collection of agents. So here in our inbound one group, you can see on the right our selected column here. These are the agents who are a member of that group, and the ones who are not are here on the left. I can move agents in or out here with the buttons here in the middle. And once I have the membership of this group set up, I can just save it the way I'd like. One option here that affects some things on the agent manager that I just want to show briefly. there is a tab here for the group called Thresholds. And if you've ever watched your agent manager, you'll probably notice that certain columns get highlighted in red or yellow as times increase or different things are going on. Those thresholds are configured here in the group on this Thresholds tab. These are generally the defaults that are going to be set up for any group, but if you do want to customize these for your own situation, for instance, maybe if there's 5 calls waiting, I want it to turn yellow, and if there's 10 calls waiting, I want it to turn red. You can adjust those numbers here on the Thresholds tab, and this affects the agent manager, what shows up highlighted in yellow or red there. And then, of course, finally, our agents themselves are set up here. Really basic information. I always like to point out with Connect now, the authentication is integrated with the PBX. So really the only information I need here is an agent name, which is going to show up in the reports, the agent username, which needs to exactly match the client username field in the PBX for this agent, and then their ID and extension. If you do have agents who hot desk, who may be working at different systems or working at different phone extensions, we can just leave this agent extension field blank. If this field is left blank here in Contact Center Director, every time the agent logs into the Agent Interaction Center webpage, they'll actually be prompted to enter the extension that they're sitting at. So if you have kind of a hot desk scenario where an agent might sit at a different phone extension each day, we can just leave this blank, and it'll ask them to enter the extension that they're sitting at when they log in. And then, of course, I can choose the groups that this agent is a member of here on the Groups tab. So really a very basic, simple setup. All we really need is an IRN that points to a service, that points to a group that contains agents. And once we have that, we've got a basic call center queue functionality set up here. A few other things to point out here in Director. Obviously, we want to have some supervisors set up in the system. Those we can set up under Supervisors and Accounts here. This is also where I can see on the Historical Report Schedules tab, if I do want to see reports that are scheduled for additional supervisors in the system, I can see that here on this page. A few other things to note here, just a couple of features that are new for Connect. One of them is the call profile lists. These call profile lists are information that appears on the Agent Interaction Center page while an agent is about to receive or on a call. So when a call is being routed to them, obviously we have some basic information that we have in the system, caller ID, name, the group and service that the call came in on, potentially the priority. In a more advanced scenario where we might be doing some kind of database lookup and we're grabbing some additional information that we want to show the agent, we can include those additional call profiles here in the call profile list. I'll just pick on, let's say, like customer name here. Oops, sorry, those are the mandatories. Oh, I'm editing the default list. Let me do that. So for instance, maybe some address information or a birthday, if we're grabbing that from another system, we can add that to this call profile list. And these call profile lists are associated with the agents themselves here. I lost. Where those go? Sure, it's a class of service. Okay, yeah, there we are. So the class of service here under the custom queue monitor, we can choose the call profile list, and the agents will see that additional information while they're on on a call. We used to do this in 14.2 with pop-ups and some different things. Now we can actually integrate it straight into that Agent Interaction Center webpage. Another new feature is the KPI board. The KPI board is, you can essentially think of it as a subset of some of the information we can display on the agent manager that we can show to all the agents. So for instance, if we wanted to show all the agents how many calls are currently in queue for their group, we can actually do that with a KPI board. We just have to define a name, what group we're interested in showing the numbers for, and then these are the subset of report information we can show the agents. In this case, I've already selected a number of waiting calls and the number of idle agents. And once we save this KPI board and associate it with that agent's class of service here, we can show them this information. This will appear at the bottom of their screen. There'll actually be a small toolbar just at the bottom of the Agent Interaction Center that'll have those numbers there listed for them, so they can see the number of waiting calls and the number of idle agents. Again, depending on your environment, that may or may not be useful. In many cases, this particular functionality will implement in BrightMetrics with a dashboard that we can either let agents pull up on their own, or we can display on a TV or monitor in the call center area so that they're able to see that information at a glance.
Great stuff, Mike. Appreciate it. We are going to schedule a follow-up to cover both the script editor and also to cover some more advanced topics on troubleshooting that were requested. Looks like we hit basically our time limit now, so we're going to open it up to any last questions. Please feel free to use the questions or the chat window to send anything in that we might be able to cover in the last little bit. And remember, we're going to send you out a link to this video to share with your team. And we're also going to send you a follow-up webinar to cover the GCCS script editor and to cover advanced troubleshooting, which will be probably another 1 hour long webinar. So we're standing by for any other questions or chat, and Mike and I will be here. Any last thoughts from you, Mike?
No, I'd just like to thank everyone for their time today. And yeah, please, we're always looking for topics for future trainings. So definitely we'll want to cover some things in obviously the advanced troubleshooting and GCCS topics. But if you do have any other questions or topics you'd like us to cover, please let us know. We'll be happy to do that.
Excellent. Thank you, Mike.